So this super funny thing happens frequently when I record non-duality videos. Specifically, when I refer to non-duality here, I'm talking about the pointing to the deep insight and realization of non-duality. This is not early awakening. This is not first awakening. This is not shadow space. This is a deep, thoroughgoing, irreversible realization. But when I make these videos, when I make these kind of pointing videos where I'm experientially pointing directly to that, what often happens is, or what I often do, is that at the beginning, I'll make a bit of disclaimer. I'll say, what I'm talking about here is not a philosophical claim. It's not a conceptual claim, right? It's not a materialistic claim or anything about mechanistic, neurologic processes, nothing like that. So if you watch the video and you find yourself arguing with me, like going, well, no, I know there's neurons in the brain and this and that, and like, right? Then what I say in these disclaimers is, if that happens to you, the video is not really for you. Like, if you're interested in awakening, genuinely interested in awakening, which I assume you are if you watch this channel, I just make the assumption, not everybody is, but I assume you are, then this video isn't going to really help you. Go back to the playlists, Basics of Awakening, Awakening Approaches, and work through that, right? Work through either a koan, a one-pointed approach, who am I? There are many approaches to this first awakening, but if you haven't had a first awakening, the solid mental structure will be so seemingly undoubtable to you that you will not at all get what I'm talking about. You just won't even get it, literally at all. And that happens, right? So I make the disclaimer. The reason I'm making this video is I did this recently. And then of course, underneath it, there's this long description of very materialistic view, arguing with, basically the quote unquote viewpoint, which this is not a viewpoint. Non-duality is not a viewpoint. It's a realization. And comparing it to the materialistic viewpoint that this person holds, right? So I just made a simple statement. And I kind of said what I just said. I said, if this puts you in your head, if this makes you think about materialistic, argumentation and so forth about neurons and the brain function and all this, then just go back to the earlier approach to awakening. That's the key for you if you want to wake up. If you just want to argue, that's fine too. But I'm not going to, get into like a long argument about it. But I just kind of point this out to people because I think maybe they didn't quite catch the disclaimer or whatever, which is kind of funny because this video had the disclaimer. But anyway, so I just make a simple statement about it. I'm like, oh, okay, well, if you really want to wake up, go back. Don't worry about this materialistic stuff versus what you think I'm saying, because what you think I'm saying is not what I'm saying. But it's not going to help you to even hear that, because the direct experience I'm pointing to is so subtle in a way that the materialistic view or the conceptual view or the tendency to conceptualize is so strong in you that you're just totally overlooking it. It's subtle, but it's also not subtle. It's paradoxical, but it's just so solid, right? That conceptual view. And I had it when I was younger, of course. So I get it. So anyway, I'll just kind of make a comment saying, yeah, here's the playlist to look at if you're interested in awakening. And there were a couple other comments on this, but someone actually said something like, Angelo, I can tell you don't like when people mention neurons, and then they mentioned, I've had an awakening, and they've had a first awakening, which they probably have. That was my sense reading the comment, and they're like, but we can live in this happy place where there's both acceptance of science and an enjoyment of science and neuroscience and all this, and realization, right? And they kind of said that, right? And I thought it was funny that they said, I don't like talking about neurologic processes or neurons or something, because it's not true, actually, at all. So I made another comment explaining, like, personally, I'm a scientist. I'm a physician. I enjoy particle physics. I read about this stuff. I'm a dork. Like, I read about quantum field theory. I read about all this. Neuroscience I don't necessarily read about a lot now because I'm trained in it in a sense, but, neurologic processes that have to do with consciousness and all this. I'm an anesthesiologist. So it's not like I don't actually like talking about neurons or something. That's just not what I'm doing here, right? That's not at all what I'm talking about when I'm talking about non-duality. Like, it's just not. More importantly, I just want to point out, and this is the crux of the video, because you may be wondering why I'm even going into all this. The crux of this video is what I talk about on this channel is not about me. It's not about my personal preferences. It's not about what annoys me to hear about or something. I don't give a shit. Like, I really don't care about what your view, like if I'm talking to you and you're working on awakening, which I assume everyone here is, I don't care whether your view is my view or a different view, or I don't care at all. It doesn't matter. It just doesn't even land. It has nothing to do with that at all. What I'm saying and why I respond the way I do is not because I'm upset or triggered or dislike some view. Everything I say is trying to help you wake up. That's it. And if you have already had an awakening, it's trying to help you get through the shadow material and get to those deeper insights and wake up further. That's literally what I'm doing here. So because that's the goal in a sense, but that's the mechanism and the energetic of what I do, I may say things that sound like I'm giving away my position as far as what I believe in or what I like or what I enjoy in the relative world. I don't necessarily. I'm not trying to hide it either, but that's just not what I'm talking about. If I'm pointing someone away from their materialistic view, it's not because I have some problem with science. It's because their materialistic view is preventing them from waking up. Period. That's it. At least that's what I sense in the conversation. And, I have a lot of experience now, and I kind of usually trust my judgment on this, but I can't. It doesn't mean I'm always right. I can't know for sure where someone's coming from, but it's pretty obvious when someone has that really solid conceptual grasping with the mind, and there's a bit of arrogance to it, and there's really no doubt in it. It's a different kind of doubtlessness than awakening, right? Awakening has this beautiful doubtlessness, but this is the doubtlessness of intellectual arrogance, right? It's a very different mechanism. And I'm not talking about an individual person. I'm talking about the mechanism of mind identification. It has this kind of arrogance where it doesn't question itself. It's so sure it's right. Yeah. So when I feel that, sense that, yeah, I'm going to point that person past. I'm going to point out that what they're doing is they're identifying with their beliefs, right? Neurons are beliefs. You don't see a neuron right now. It's not in your direct experience, right? Synapses are not in your direct experience. Neurotransmitters are not in your direct experience. They're things you learned about, right? They're things you learned about. And so what I'm pointing to is when we're talking about awakening, we're talking about direct experience. Always. Always. So if you're getting in your head about it, you're talking about, thinking about, arguing about whether neurons are, true or not true, or whether Angela believes in them or that's not the point at all. What's happening is you're in your mind. You're literally in your thoughts. You're trying to hold your world together. You're trying to solidify your world, your materialistic view. It can be, and it doesn't have to be a materialistic view, by the way. People do the same exact thing with a spiritual view, with a non-materialistic view. I've seen it. I've felt it, where it's just as solid, right? Just as solid. And I'll do the same thing. I'll try to break them out of that. I'll try to undermine their idea of spirituality in a sense, right? I'm talking in a kind of meta way now, but, and I try to do it in a compassionate way and work with someone where they are and not push them beyond what I think they can handle in that moment. But it's the same thing. Materialistic view, spiritual view, enlightenment view. Any of these views are going to be obstructions if you're identifying with them. And that's what I feel when I make these comments to people. I feel them identifying and trying to hold that solidity and that confidence that's just intellectual confidence, intellectual sort of arrogance, right? I'm trying to break that down because I assume you want to wake up. If you're talking to me, I'm assuming you want to wake up. If you're on my channel making comments, I'm assuming you want to wake up, until I sort of just judge someone's really just trolling and they really don't care. Then I'll kind of ignore it or get them off the channel if they're being belligerent. But yeah, if somebody's just kind of, they feel like they're trying to engage the topic, but they're really getting stuck in that rigid materialistic view, then I will point it out for sure, right? That's what I'm trying to do here. So yeah, that's essentially what I wanted to say. And it just fascinates me how tenacious the mind is. The identified mind is so freaking tenacious. That's why I say again and again and again, I'm not talking about thoughts. I'm not talking about thoughts. Notice the difference between a thought and your direct experience. And it doesn't matter how nuanced and complex your understanding of science is or neuroscience, it's still a bunch of fucking thoughts. Just like your story about what happened when you were a child, just like your argument with your landlord right now that you can't stop going over in your mind. Same thing. It's the same thing. It's a bunch of thoughts, right? Same as your spiritual. I've been on the spiritual journey for so long. I've done this. I just can't break through. That solidity, same thing. that it's all the same thing. It's mind identification. It is the identifying with thoughts that is the barrier. That is the barrier, right? That's what broke through for me. That's what made this huge shift for me when I was 24 years old. I suffered so much before that. But what made the whole shift is I finally saw it. I finally saw what I was doing to myself. So it may not be a materialistic view for you. It may be a spiritual view. It may be a narrative view, maybe a victim view. It may be there's so many views, right? Parent view, child view, brother, sister, boss, coworker. Like, we have these views where we use the narrative of what seems to be happening in our life to solidify the sense of the self that is either trying to defend itself, or it's so confident with its attachment to thoughts that it doesn't even feel like it has to defend itself. It just feels like, oh, I'm right. I'm right. And that's even another layer of this kind of solidity. But so what happens with that layer, that inauthentic layer that's like, oh no, I'm confident, I'm right, I don't suffer. What happens with that's interesting. And tends to be a masculine movement, for the most part. But what happens with that one is very interesting, is if they are willing to just question in the right way, or actually just keep exposing themselves to this kind of pointing, all of a sudden there'll be a chink in that armor of confidence. And what you're going to experience when that chink in the armor comes, you're either going to full on know that you actually are suffering and you didn't realize it. And you'll be like, whoa, how did I hide that from myself? Like, I kind of knew it, but I wasn't looking at it. I was trying to look everywhere but there. And I was using whatever I was using to do it. It could have been a materialistic view. It could have been a spiritual view. It could have been anything. All of a sudden you're like, fuck, it's so strong, the suffering, right? That's one thing that happens with this kind of solid, confident, but a bit arrogant, like mind identified state. The other one is like you'll and this happens actually interestingly, sometimes through the materialistic view. I knew somebody who was a neuroscience major, and she was telling me that she's very sharp. She was thinking about the way neurons and consciousness work, and all of a sudden it all stopped. Like there was like void, and it terrified her. It was an existential terror. And she thought, I never want to go back there again, right? Never, I'm going to do anything I can not to think about that again or go back there again. So strangely, sometimes if you really take that empirical or questioning or scientific method, really, where you don't assume anything you can't directly experience, take it to the extreme, even in your materialistic view, you may break through. That kind of breakthrough feels more like terror or fear. And so what I've sensed a lot of times in people who are really holding those views really strongly, right, that they're afraid of being afraid. They're afraid of the vastness of the terror that is underneath their solid, confident exterior, or interior, let's say. So anyway, another video about mind identification. It's kind of my favorite subject. It's so fascinating because it's so tenacious, and it's so strong in a way. It's so convincing when you're in it, like you're identified with those thoughts and beliefs. It's so solid. And you can believe yourself to be spiritual. You can think you have spiritual insights because you've read about, Buddhism and all these things. And I've seen it. And it can be slippery, right? You can hide it. You can hide a lot from yourself in a way through mind identification. That's the only way you can actually do it, really. Strangely enough, is the identity structure has this way of sectioning reality, sectioning off experience. And that's why when we're talking about non-duality, it's such a deep realization that if you're grossly sectioning off experience constantly and fragmenting experience through concepts and mind, then you're not going to see the subtlety of the fact that there's actually no fragmentation happening even in the physical world around you. Because to see that would be devastating. It would be devastating. So you also have to kind of be ready for it too, to do those deeper investigations. So again, if you're interested in this stuff, it sounds like there's something here for you, because this is about you. It's not about Buddhism. It's not about non-duality as a subject. It's not about anti-materialism. It's not about any of that shit. It's about you. It's about where you want to go. It's about your own suffering. If you're interested in that, and you haven't had a true shift in identity, then just work toward Kansho, or that first awakening, which I have playlists. I have an introductory series that kind of get your feet wet with non-duality or what I do, this awakening stuff. There's a playlist called awakening approach, or I'm sorry, basics of awakening, and then awakening approaches. And in that order, they kind of get more and more direct. There's a playlist, I think, called Inquiry. That's a good one. Mind identification, thoughts. Those are all good playlists for someone who's really trying to work toward that first shift. But don't worry about arguing with me or yourself or anyone else about materialism when it comes to what we're talking about here. Because what we're talking about here is not in the realm of materialism versus non-materialism versus idealism. That is the mental realm. What we're talking about here is just not in that realm. It's beyond it. You have to penetrate that realm to finally know what I'm actually talking about.